She takes out everyone one by one in all these like James Bond-esque MacGyver type special mechanism under her jacket that has a gun by the trigger and is pulled as she pulls her glasses down. It's a film with some of French's biggest stars like Jodie Foster, because this week it's A Very Long Engagement, directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet. The director here, we've seen quite a few of his films. He's a real visionary. He's an interesting director because he's kind of like a blend of Charlie Chaplin and Wes Anderson, put together with his own unique sort of take on things as well. He's got a real distinct visual style, not just in terms of the way his shots are framed and the cartoonish acting and overacting and expressions and the physicality of what goes on inside the shot, but also the way the story weaves and is edited together and jumps from one thing to the next. He loves a voiceover narration where whatever we're heard being talked about is instantly cut to on screen. A lot of time like suddenly revealing something comical. Very charming and also kind of silly the way he likes to tell his stories. But it's interesting because, you know, his previous films like Delicatessen and Amélie, and they don't focus on really serious subject matter. So the whimsical, silly, comical, cartoonish storytelling and narrative and set design really suits it. This film's interesting because it's one of the most gravest, serious topics and events and periods in human history, World War I Europe, especially from France's point of view, because there was, you know, so much loss and so much heartache, so much bad feelings about the war and how the war went for them and what it meant for their future and, you know, the amount of deaths and hardships at the time. And it's interesting because the way it plays out against his style, at sometimes it should be more jarring than it is, but it's really not. It does work, but it's quite a unique film in a lot of ways. I don't think there's any other World War I or World War II film, or probably many other war films, told quite like this.
This is one of the best films I've seen for character building. The way that he gives us the backstory to each of the characters we're seeing. I've rarely seen it done better in other films, so fantastic credit to the director there. My dad recommended this film. Not a huge fan of French cinema. Some of the stuff that you've reeled off there, Delicatessen, you know, the butcher where it's set in the war as well, where they're eating human beings, it turns out. Amélie, always quoted in a lot of people's top 10 films. I never rated it as highly as everyone else did.
It's probably my least favourite of all his films as well. I never really got that either.
But it made Audrey Tautou into a megastar, essentially. Here she is again. She's strikingly beautiful, man.
I mean, one particular scene where you see the fact that the background of her character is that she had polio as a child, and as a result, you know, she limps throughout the film. They had all these stupid home remedies that didn't work. And one of the things she needed from a young age was massages daily by this giant, like, mustachioed, fucking burly, hunky Frenchman, which she gets completely naked at one point in a fucking awesome scene. And that's one thing I've got to give the director, is the sex scene has died out, and he is not afraid of a bit of nudity, a bit of sexuality on screen, which I don't really get why it's completely removed from all films nowadays, because it's one of the major parts of life and things that we're interested in, things that we're motivated by, so I don't really get that, but he throws them in constantly.
I love it.
I wish I knew if that was actually her body or not.
I think it was.
You're just saying that because you want it to be true?
Yeah, we'll say it is for the sake of my research. But at the heart of it, this is a romance between Mathilde, Audrey Tautou's character, and her fiancé who's gone off to fight in the trenches of Battle of World War I. We see a very, very touching scenes where we're introduced to their relationship. They met as young kids on the streets of France. He turns out to be the son of the lighthouse keeper, and he takes her up to the lighthouse where they grow a connection. They become romantically involved. He lost her virginity to her, and probably vice versa. So they have a very, very strong connection. None of it seemed forced. Again, great credit to the director. We see all these zany characters in the film and a lot of throwaway, maybe forgettable characters in the hands of other directors. You are rooting for these characters, and that is a real testament to the skill of his direction, because sometimes in films, main characters even, you're like, I don't give a shit about this because they haven't done a good job of fleshing out their backstories and development for the audience, and he does this perfectly.
100%. And you spoke there about they created that connection between Mathilde and her fiancé, because that needs to be real and that needs to be believable, and you need to fully buy into that. That is the driving motivation. That's the wind in her sails that drives her relentlessly looking for him, refusing to believe that he's dead. And it's the whole heart of the film. Well, it's the tentpole of the film that the rest of the film is held up by, because really this film is about a lot of different people's stories, and it's nearly her search for it is just a reason to end up exploring these other stories. At times it's secondary, and I'd imagine a lot of people's favourite storylines or characters in these films aren't necessarily the main two. But what's interesting about that is you don't see that early on where they first met, and you don't really see the relationship kindling and develop until a good hour and 20 minutes into the film. The first hour you're really just seeing her on this Terminator-like path of destruction, you know, hobbling and limping from place to place, you know, pretending to be in a wheelchair to guilt her uncle when she needs to get into the war records so that she can see, you know, what actually happened and why her fiance and these 4 other men, for one reason or another, were condemned to die. You know, we see a montage at the beginning of either them accidentally shooting themselves in the hand or intentionally shooting themselves in the hands in order to try and get out of the war and get sent home. All of them get court-martialed and sent not just to die, but sent over the trenches into the enemy battlefield. And what's great is this film is actually a giant detective story, essentially. It's kind of a war film, kind of a stuck at home during the war film, kind of a detective story, and kind of an ensemble cast sort of movie where you're seeing all these different mini characters. Narrative-wise, it's a glorious mess. Like Tarantino, Christopher Nolan would blush at how all over the place this film is. It starts at the end and goes back to the beginning and flies to this character, and like if there's a postman in it for 2 seconds, you're probably going to find out about his backstory and how he met his wife. And you know, one character in a bar has a missing hand and he's got like a Terminator, I keep going back to the Terminator for some reason, but he's got the exoskeleton wooden hand version.
Great for wanking.
Great, yeah, well potentially, yeah, you might fucking grip too hard. Yeah. And all these amazing little plots, and it's not a film where blink and you'll miss it, you'll be lost, where's the plot? Because ultimately it's twisty and turny, but through those twists and turns there's a pretty straight linear route to she's trying to find her fiance. That is always the driving motivation, that's all that matters. But if you blink, you will miss some random brilliant small insignificant to the plot character, but that is just fun and interesting and quirky. There's characters in this that show up for 5 seconds that I'd like to see a whole spin-off film of. It's so rich with interesting characters and interesting storylines and motivations, and you know, they always say actors love to give themselves a stutter or a tick, or you know, they always wear the same hat, you know, some little dumb thing they're trying to give their character to make it more deeper and richer and stand out. You wouldn't need to do any of that in this film because everyone has all these written in little bizarre things, even like Mathilde's mum, who loves dog farts for some fucking weird reason. You know, it's an amazing film.
The 5 condemned soldiers, we see where they are, how they got to the trenches, how they got to the war. You know, one of them's a carpenter who's madly in love with some ginger lady. He wants to get back to her. Another one's a scumbag that pisses in other soldiers' helmet. I didn't get that. Why didn't he just piss on the floor?
Just a dick.
He's just a scumbag.
He's a Corsican.
He's a pimp. He's been stabbed in the bum for his like misdemeanors back at home.
Was he stabbed in the arse or was he doing the stabbing? Because it's Tina Lombardi's character who actually hands him the knife and spits on it. So I'm assuming it's her.
Tina Lombardi, someone who has inventively murdered someone by shooting a mirror where the glass pierces into him. You know, all these zany characters that in the hands of someone else, you might actually give up on this film because you're like, this is a bit much. But I like the fact that not everything has to have such a rigid structure to work, and this one definitely doesn't, and it works perfectly. Like, I can get Declan why people might complain. It jumps from this to that, to this to that, to this to that, but ultimately it works. It's a film of contrast. I noticed the grading. It will cut back to Mathilde and her quest trying to find her fiancé. All her scenes will be very warm in grading, and then it will cut to the poor, depressing, destitute on the front, dark and depressing.
Throughout the whole film, there must be hundreds of thousands of different colours used. But whenever you're in one particular scene, it feels like there's only ever 3 colours to the palette.
Yeah.
And they'll be in total contrast, like you say, to the trenches. And there's one moment that really hits at home later on in the story where she's finally taken by someone after the war's ended to where the trenches once laid. And what was this horrific battleground just filled with dark greens and blues and greys and blacks, barren earth littered with corpses, and it's now this beautiful meadow. Fields are nearly as golden as the sun. The contrast between the two is just incredible, and the colours are used are beautiful. The costumes as well are fantastic, and that's the thing with this film, where it does become cartoonish at points. Some of the battle scenes, they're very stylised, but you wouldn't be out of place in a grindhouse film at points. I do wonder sometimes, would some people have been a little bit sensitive and triggered by some of this, seeing what was an atrocity that killed millions of people displayed in this kind of comical ways at times. And by the way, I'm not saying at all, I don't give a fuck about people getting offended by shit. I think you should fuck off. If you don't like it, don't watch it, move on. Yeah. None of that. But I'm just curious, because if this war had just happened, say you were doing this comical style, but about the Afghanistan war, how would it hit differently compared to when it's a long time ago? And if you were doing it about Genghis Khan or the Romans, no one would care at all. But do you know what I mean? Because it's a weird thing where it is comical at times, it is silly, it is it's a whimsical, cartoonish, very cinematic, stylized way of going through it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. People will get offended about nothing, so certainly people will get offended about this. There's a documentary, I can't remember what it's called. It's set in Asia, where basically there was a big atrocity or genocide, and they get the people who committed to recreate it in kind of like documentary style, and it got fucking criticised. It's a bit like that. But yeah, I do agree with you. But I think if they were then to do the scenes where she's searching for her fiancé Manech, and then make the war scenes deadly serious, it wouldn't make any sense, It wouldn't fit the style of the film. It'd be like Wes Anderson being so quirky in some scenes and then deadly serious in others. You'd be like, what the fuck is this guy doing?
You're right. And also, I feel like it would have been really borderline egregious if it was a pro-war film and it had that style. But this is clearly pro-humanity, anti-war film. So with that sense, it leans into showing the absurdity of war in general, and just, all these poor men being in this situation, desperate for their lives, desperate to get out. And I did appreciate, during the battles, there wasn't heroics going on. And I don't mean in a they're all pussies kind of way. I mean, there wasn't even the Save It Private Ryan, they saved the day and they're brave and, sort of thing. It was just, this is fucking horrible. Look at your friend getting blown to pieces in front of you. One of the first things we see in terms of a battle is Mathilde's fiancé seeing his friend blown into pieces, his guts and body parts and what was formerly his self covering him, and him just completely losing his mind. And he loses his mind for the rest of the film.
The reason he gets court-martialed, he puts a cigarette into his hands and then raises it up. And the snipers, they can see the cigarette, thinking that it's a soldier smoking, so bang, into the head. He deliberately gets his hand shot. And the sergeant comes along and says, you've done this on purpose, straight up to the court-martial. And even the other soldiers are saying, no, have some humanity. The guy was a good fighter before. He was never like that, because back home he used to be like the one that operated the lighthouse going on ropes. He wasn't a pussy. He wasn't a coward. It was this circumstance that made him like that. But no one cared about that. They just cared about the more bodies, the better. We need the bodies to try and win this war. And then you really see, in times of war, that humanity goes out the window.
It's just nuts when you think what we know now about trauma and PTSD and everything. The idea that these poor people who had had mental breakdowns would be executed because of it. The official term was executed for cowardice.
Yeah.
It's just insane. The lack of fucking humanity. Talk about having shitty options in life. You're conscripted, first of all. You gotta go to war. You're just a piece of meat that's getting thrown over the side. And it's not even a case of you're not allowed to pussy out. You're not allowed to lose your mind, or else you'll be killed by your own people. Yeah. And it's just fucked. And you see the five, as Mathilde is putting together her case and building, she's got her quirky, funny little private eye that she's hired, who's a solid guy who, he basically gives her a discount rate of virtually nothing. Pretty much just probably covering his expenses. You see the fact that he's got a daughter who's also lame and has lost a leg, and the fact that she's, disabled obviously means something to him, and so he has that affection for her. And she's putting together this case alongside him, and she's putting it all together, and we start to see that the five 5 men went over the top, and one died, one escaped, one went this way, and every time she tracks down another person, she learns a little bit more, and she learns more about what happened to the other 4 soldiers until she finally learns what happened to her fiancé. And it's beautiful as we start to see their background stories. No one's really a hero. They're just real human beings trying to escape this situation.
This film is like a load of different genres at once. A romance, a war film, a madcap chase. It's a French film. Like, it's a fucking madness the more you think about it. You know an idea on paper to formulate into something physical. It must have been difficult. But what you said about The Private Eye and that one scene where his daughter turns out to be lame, that perfectly sums up the skill in the character development, because that was one scene. When she walked in and was lame, it was like, oh wow, now we see why he's doing it. What's his motive? Like, fucking fantastic.
It's a Hitchcock thing. I remember someone talking about one of the reasons Hitchcock's so good. If there's a character in it for 2 seconds, they got a couple of lines of dialogue, they'll move along the plot, but they'll also he'll find a way, either through what they say or what they're doing, to weave in something that tells you everything you need to know about that character. And it's the same in this, where it's great visual storytelling, real cinematic storytelling. People say things, but it's more about what they're doing, and that's what really tells you about the plot. And you get these great moments where, like you said, within a second you know everything you need to know. It's great as well as we learn about the other soldiers who were condemned and their lives. One of them who is married to Jodie Foster, and he has 4 children that aren't actually his from a previous wife, and she has a child from a previous marriage, and they've come together and they love each other. But when he goes off to the war, he comes back on leave and he's crazy and he's drinking and he's not the same anymore, and he's starting to lose his mind. And you see that if you have 6 children officially, the French government sends you home and you don't have to be in the army anymore. But he can't have children, so he starts begging his wife and his best friend to sleep together so that they will have a baby. Eventually they do it. Fucking awesome sex scenes. And funnily enough, they actually never even end up getting pregnant, despite the fact they seemingly over a couple of weeks, until he has to ship off again. And you see that while they've done that, they've kind of like fallen in love, or at least lust, and they fucking proper fancy each other, and they never even end up getting pregnant, and that drives her husband completely insane with jealousy then.
As it would.
Well, he asked for it.
Oh, it's another element where it's done well, but the more you read into it, fucking depressing.
Really fucked up, especially from a guy's point of view. Just a disturbing concept to even explore, that you'd be that desperate.
Disturbing, but done in the element of black humour yet again. If all of this stuff was done seriously, this could potentially be one of the most depressing films ever made.
Yeah, that's the thing. But I don't know would it be worse doing it that way? I nearly find it more disturbing that it's being done in a comical way. Maybe it's that thing where you have to find some humour in it, otherwise you really will just blow your brains out, because the concept of it is just horrifying.
I like these little scenes. It might have been difficult to watch and be like, oh, this is really fucked up, but what it gave me as the viewer, it's like, I like to know people's backstory. I like to know whether, are these people good? Should I root for them? Should I not? There's the scumbag in it. I didn't even want him to die. I wanted him to survive. I like those scumbags.
Yeah, he's great.
Do you know what I mean? We want to know, Declan, as the audience member. Do we care if they die? I cared about them. And it was only 2 and a bit hours, because at the end of the day, I might not have sympathy for them. They've tried to fucking get out of this war. Some audience member be like, cowards, I hope they all die. I did not. I was rooting for them.
No, I think you have to be either fucking stupid or a psycho to take that perspective, because it does just lay it out like war looks fucking horrible, man. Yeah. It is, especially this sort of war. World War One was the first war where classical warfare met modern warfare, and no one knew what the fuck they were doing. They had tanks rolling onto the battlefield as they were still doing cavalry charges. No one knew what the fuck they were doing. They figured out as they went along, and the price of figuring all that out was millions and millions of people's lives sent to slaughter. So fuck it, yeah, of course I'd be shooting myself in the head. I'd shoot all my fingers off to try and get out of it. My favourite character in the whole film is Tina Lombadi, the prostitute who's doing her own parallel investigation, and she's actually quite further ahead than Mathilde in the story, but her point of view is revenge. She is wiping everyone out. The general who knew that the men were pardoned but couldn't be bothered to send it on, and instead used it as a little makeshift thing to fix his magnifying glass so that he could look at all the naked photos he had. the evil officer who enjoyed shooting the men and killing them as they were desperate for help over the trenches. She takes out everyone one by one in all these like James Bond-esque MacGyver type clever ways. You know, at one point she has a special mechanism under her jacket that has a gun by the trigger and is pulled as she pulls her glasses down. Ridiculous, but within the context of the whole film really works. She ends up tragically dying, and they finally meet as she's in prison. She's about to be executed, and Mathilde comes in to interview her, get some of the final nuggets of information that will lead her to her fiancé. And she also, in turn, has a message to pass on from the pimp, and it just reads, "Don't go for revenge, don't try it, it's pointless, just live a good life." And it's sad because, you know, it's already too late.
Some of these scenes reminded me of that brilliant Pink Floyd song, Us and Them. You know, listen, son, said the man with a gun, there's room for you this side. It's a battle of words where most of them will die. Like that, it's like the generals in their offices moving stuff on maps. They don't give a shit about the people, the cannon fodder on the front line. They're just trying to be tactical and win this war. And I was very, very happy when Tina Lombadi iced the guy, man, the fat pig, like, with cool way, gets the gun. You think he's just going to shoot him in the head. He's all tied up because he dies essentially because of his chauvinistic tendencies, his greed, his...
Well, he wants to fuck. I would never go in for that.
He wants to fuck her, like, and she has him all tied up exactly where she wants him. Shoots the mirror up into him. Like, it was fucking brilliant. I got such satisfaction from that.
Yeah, he really was a piece of shit. And it's sad as well because that's the only comeuppance they get, which is big comeuppance, but we don't see any confrontations. A lot of the anger and anguish gets taken out on the lower level people. You know, maybe officers who followed the orders to do what they were doing, but tried their best. You know, one of them writes a report saying the men shouldn't be killed. When he hands it to that same general that you talked about a second ago getting killed, you know, he just throws it in his bathwater straight away, gets it messed up so he doesn't have to read it and throws it back to him because they're not interested. These are all just numbers to them. They're not real human beings. What did you think of the final sequence as she finally finds her fiancé?
It's been a big build up. Limps up the stairs into some, you know, nice mansion. She goes for a beautiful shot where the corridors are all beautifully lit and it's a lovely little building. She then comes out into a garden for a wooded clearing and he's just there building a box, and she just sits down in a chair and doesn't say anything and just kind of like looks at him like, "I've done it, you're alive, I found you," you know. And he just turns to her and goes, "Why are you crying?" It didn't have to be running into each other's arms, big bombastic thing. It was beautifully done.
Like you pointed out earlier, there's a moment where the private eye shows his daughter that also has a lame leg. And it tells you everything about that moment and about his motivations and his sentiment towards Mathilde. Everything you need to know. And there's a perfect moment like that when her fiancé looks up and sees her for the first time in this final sequence. He has amnesia at this point. He remembers nothing. So essentially, he's never met her. And he says the exact same words that are the first words he says to her when he's a 10-year-old boy and meets her for the first time. "Oh, does it hurt when you walk?" And it's such a beautiful little line because it tells you everything about the fact that even though he's been so fucked up by war, he went insane, now he's lost his memory. I don't know if it was a concussion or maybe he just trauma-wise blocked everything out that ever happened to him. Like they said, he's had to read and write again. He literally had a falsely adopted mother who lost her own child and went insane and basically took him as her own, who's since died. So it's nearly like he's been rebirthed and reborn and not just brought back to him, but brought back to him as that exact same 10-year-old child as when she first met him. And it's beautiful because, you know, their love story literally doesn't just resume but starts again afresh and they've got a clean slate. Boom.
And that gets me to thinking, Declan, just all wars really, even if they hadn't lost their mind like he had in his film, from going to the war to then being back to normal life and trying to like readjust, imagine that. You've just been on the front line, scared for your life every day. Next thing, you're just in the supermarket trying to work out what you need to do. It is literally like being born again.
And then don't even think of it as the individual. Think about the fact that Europe had a 20-year period where you had the two biggest wars of all time. Not even just if you were on the front line, if you were back home and the Blitz or being in bombed out Germany or occupied France, the absolute unprecedented level of trauma and PTSD that pretty much the entire continent must have had. That must have psychologically changed the entire population for at least generations. It must still be feeling the effects because we were raised by them, so
yeah, well,
it's insane.
You wake up, you have no food, everything's bombed to shit. At any moment you might get a telegram that your whole family is dead. Imagine the fucking trauma of it. I think this is a fucking brilliant film. If you're looking for a jumping in point to French cinema, I would recommend Binning Off Amélie. Fuck it. I would start here, man. I would start here as a good entrance point into French cinema and going from there. That's how good I think this film is. Its subject matter is handled with great feeling by the director. As we've mentioned, me and Declan have mentioned this, it could become a very depressing, sad film, but the way it's done with those elements of humours and the tenacity of Mathilde's character with the polio, with the limp, to find her love, I just thought it was all very, very touching, and just a fantastic, beautifully made and shot film. So I would highly recommend it.